New album from Tracey. For any non-UK based viewers, this guy is one of the biggest names in UK hip hop at the moment. Really made a huge name for himself and has been one of the bigger pop rap names in the UK. Along with other big hitters like Stormzy, Tracey has just managed to break through into the mainstream in a pretty huge way by blending, genres of pop, rap, hip-hop, grime as well, just all together to create a pretty mainstream appealing sound, and has just managed to rise up to the mainstream and the top of the charts with many hits. I'm only really scratching the surface with some of those names. There's plenty of others out there too, but I think AJ has managed to really make a name for himself, and you can see why. A few times on this album he's talking about how he influenced other rappers in the game and how he's at the top of the game and how he's, one of the big guys in this field, in this genre at the moment, because he kind of is. Never been huge on this guy up until this point, but I was pretty interested to see what this new album would sound like, pretty curious, and honestly it's surprised me because I found it to be pretty enjoyable. For the runtime and for the amount of tracks there is, I was ready to just be like, I'm not gonna like this, probably one listen and I'm done. But no, it was not like that at all. Tracey has essentially done what I just said a minute ago on this album, blending accessible pop rap elements together while also just, keeping true to himself with his gruff and rough tones throughout, very much reminiscent of, early Wiley and artists like that. Dizzy Rascal, who are, from their roots, they are grime artists, but they are able to take that to the pop realms and make some catchy, accessible music. Really dark way to kick things off with that really heavy, gloomy trap inspired beat on the first track. Really dirty in a way it sounds. This is a good way to kick things off because it shows one side of him that we don't necessarily see for the rest of the album, but I think if he stayed in this lane for the whole time, it might have got a bit boring, a bit stale. But immediately after that we have a Nav feature, of all people. Nav is on this album, and yet suddenly we see that chirpier, poppier side come through and just makes for a pretty fun tune overall. I will say Nav's voice grates a little bit. I mean, I've spoken about Nav before. I think some people go a bit overboard with how bad Nav is. I don't think he's that bad, but I think too much of his voice certainly is enough to put me off, and I think this track nearly goes about it nearly gets there. Nearly too much Nav, honestly. Cheerleaders goes back to the cold sound though. This track is cold. Like the way he's rapping over this, the beat, oof, it just has ice just consuming it. It's a cold song. Funnily enough, just reviewing Conway yesterday, this is like some older Conway where everything just feels so gloomy and fucking drivel. Like everything's just so ugh. Some odd lines occasionally though. I'm not gonna say AJ is the best rapper out there. The whole Ariana thing that he throws in is a bit odd. But I still think it's a good track. Still think he manages to maintain some good choruses and memorable choruses throughout this album too, while also keeping that darkness there as well. Of course, it wouldn't be an album in this field without at least one song talking about his come up. Obviously, we had to have that with Draft Pick. Essentially, like I said before, just kind of talking about how he's influencing people in the game, but he's talking about where he came from and where he is at now. What's noticeable about this track though, which I think is quite impressive throughout the whole album, is that he never really wastes space. Like he's always got something to say and he always delivers it in a really confident way. And I think that's quite an interesting thing to bring up, because I think some rappers sometimes can just, say all this kind of filler stuff and just throw anything out there as long as it rhymes. But even when Tracey isn't spitting the most lyrical, spiritual, miracle stuff, it isn't the most amazing bars you've ever heard or anything like that, he still manages to fill space quite well and keep you entertained with his flows. I think that's a pretty good skill that he's managed to bring in pretty early on in his career. And then on the flip side of that, you got A Little More Love, which is just a catchy bop. Like the way this beat is just so made for clubs and, pubs, and well, it's perfect timing actually now in the UK. Things like that are starting to open pretty soon, so I wouldn't be surprised if this one was a pretty big staple for that environment. Really great production on this one, honestly just so catchy. It's not quite as, you know, animated as some of those big bangers from Dizzy Rascal, but I think he's kind of almost getting there with tracks like this. It really is just a fun little tune. Top Dog takes things in a bit of a sillier direction, I must say, with the chorus. I'm your doggy doggy, I'm your top dog. But it kind of is a bit of fun. I don't mind it so much. I think, again, it could really land poorly for people, especially if up until this point you've not been enjoying the album. I think a track like this could really irk you and annoy you. But I like how, as the album goes on, you do start to get more of these laid-back, chill, fun, summery little pop tunes. And I just like the way he's not taking himself all too seriously. One of the biggest examples of that is actually one of my least favourite tracks, I'm not going to lie. Number 9. This track's got Baby on here. Wow, impressive to see this guy on an AJ Tracey track, similar to Nav. Just wasn't expecting to see that at all. But I don't know, the hook, man, just gets really old quick. Just not feeling this at all. Like, it just gets so old quickly, and it's a shame because I think there's a good track here somewhere if you just didn't like overdo it with that chorus. But then you've got impressive moments like Coupe, which has a more I guess the DJ Khaled feels of it. You know that song with Rihanna? What was that song called? That went do 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 do. I think it took a sample from Santana from like 2001 or something. You know the song. This beat sounds a lot like that. Wild Thoughts? I think it was called Wild Thoughts. Yeah, it was like wild, wild, wild thoughts. Wow, 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 thoughts. Really reminds me of that anyway. Kalani coming through with an okay feature. Not sure this was that great, honestly. And then that one line that AJ Tracey keeps saying about having something in his trousers. I assume he's, you know, not talking about his ID, like his driving license. I mean, I'm sure he's not talking about, you know, his Nectar card for Sainsbury's, is he? Or his club card for Tesco's. I think we know what he's talking about. Dinner Guest takes things in a more, again, silly, playful, quirky little direction. Maybe not quirky, actually. Just a bit more of like a cheeky, you know? We're not taking ourselves too seriously here. You know, AJ's labeling himself as the guy that's so good for being the girl's dinner guest type thing. And the verses as well are just pretty fun. Nothing, again, amazing you're going to find lyrically here, but I just think, again, this track just has a catchy element to it that I just really like. It just clearly knows it's having fun, doesn't take itself too seriously, and I'm all for it. We close out with what I think is one of the biggest hits from this album. I'd have to check this. Maybe I should have checked it before recording. I'm sorry, guys. That was a bad move on my part. But West 10 with Mabel. I'm sure I've heard this around and about on radios and stuff. I think it's been a pretty big hit, and you can hear why. Again, just taking it back to those early 2010s, you've got that Katie B vibe to it as well. Who is so good. Katie B deserved better, I say it all the time. And also some tracks that you see Wiley collaborate with in the early 2010s, you know, tracks like Heatwave, where he always decided to just have a female feature on every track for like that 3 or 4 year period. And to be fair, they were pretty good tracks. I mean, they were fun summer bangers, and this track here is exactly like that. And Mabel brings great vocals, honestly. I was never that big of a fan of Mabel. I listened to her album, really didn't see the hype behind many of the tracks that gained a lot of hype, but here, I think she kills it. I think this is what I wanted more from like Kalani, to be honest. I think I wanted a bigger vocal performance, and Mabel just brings it, really brings it. Good track, fun again, definitely takes the album in a very bizarre direction for the final track, considering, you know, everything up until this point hasn't quite gone as pop as this, as big as this. But clearly, you know, the garage pop influence really came through, and he could probably do more songs like this, actually, and I think it would work. But regardless, I still enjoy quite a lot of this album, you know? I don't think there's a huge amount of filler. There is a bit of filler, certainly in some of the moments that I didn't like, but maybe that's not filler, that's just me not liking those songs anyway, so, you know, take that for what you will. But I will say this, it's been a bit of a while since I really liked a UK hip-hop album, to be honest. It's been a while. There's the odd one that breaks through, and I do listen to more than I review, I will say that too, and a lot of it just goes in one ear out the other. A lot of it doesn't land with me that much, but I had to review this because I do think it's really quite good. Again, not amazing lyrically, and you know, not every track hits, but I think for the most part this is really quite good. 7 out of 10 from me. I think AJ Tracey really delivered quite well on this album here, and hopefully you agree. Hopefully you watch this review, enjoy what I had to say, and also agree with what I had to say. But if you don't, let me know in the comments what you think. If you don't agree with this review, let me know. Would love to hear your thoughts. What's your favourite track as well? Have a good day, subscribe if you haven't already, and goodbye.